New Zealand just sank a US Navy warship. They used an AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missile fired from a Boeing P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. And get this, the missile they actually used belonged to Australia. This strike went down during a massive US-led multinational military drill, Exercise Valiant Shield 2026. The target of this operation, a decommissioned US Navy Austin-class amphibious transport dock, the USS Juno LPD-10. During the exercise, 2 Harpoon missiles were successfully launched from the Royal New Zealand Air Force P-8A, slamming into the target ship's hull with absolute pinpoint accuracy. This drill is a massive deal for New Zealand. It marks the return of long-range anti-ship strike capabilities, something they had completely scrubbed from their military doctrine decades ago. From a tactical standpoint, their fleet's transition from the aging P-3K2 Orions to the P-8A Poseidons is incredibly fascinating. The Poseidon isn't just passively dropping sonobuoys and lightweight torpedoes to hunt subs anymore. Now it can sling AGM-84 Harpoons with a strike range pushing well over 75 miles. It transforms this patrol plane into an absolute beast of an anti-surface warfare platform. And here is the kicker. The live ammo used in this drill was borrowed straight from Australia's military stockpile, which showcases some seriously high-level alliance interoperability between the two nations. If a full-blown conflict actually breaks out in the Pacific, it's exactly this kind of joint logistics supply chain and flexibility that is going to save lives, and it could very well be the deciding factor in naval dominance. But this exercise begs a really interesting question. Why does a country geographically isolated from the world's major flashpoints, like New Zealand, suddenly feel the need to muscle up its military? The answer points straight to the aggressive maritime expansion by China's PLA Navy. Over the last decade, Beijing hasn't just been rapidly beefing up its combat capabilities, they've also been sending military vessels closer and closer to New Zealand's exclusive economic zone. They have been tracked multiple times, and this poses a direct, simultaneous threat to the defense of both Canberra and Wellington. While New Zealand is busy drilling its combat capabilities, there is another highly interesting development happening right to their north in Southeast Asia. Word is that Indonesia is gearing up to bring in MiG-29 fighter jets from Belarus. The plan to acquire the fighter jets, known to NATO as the Fulcrum, follows a highly publicized recent visit by the Belarusian president to Jakarta. This signals that military ties between the two nations are getting much tighter, and honestly, this is a fascinating maneuver. Keep in mind, Indonesia previously bypassed traditional Western suppliers to bring in the Buk air defense missile system from Belarus, but fighter jets, that is on a completely different level. The heavily discussed narrative is that Jakarta is bringing in the MiG-29s to be set up as a dedicated aggressor squadron. Basically, they want to build their own version of a Red Air training unit. Right now, Indonesia is in a massive, multi-billion-dollar modernization phase. They are buying fleets of 4.5-generation Dassault Rafales from France, but canceled advanced American platforms like the F-15EX. The claimed objective is to use these Belarusian MiGs to train Indonesian pilots who are currently transitioning to high-end Western technology. By flying mock dogfights against actual MiG-29s, Indonesian aviators can get vital hands-on experience regarding the flight characteristics of Eastern-bloc fighter jets. The MiG-29 is legendary for its raw maneuverability, powered by twin Klimov RD-33 afterburning turbofans. The aircraft is heavily associated with the deadly R-73 off-board sight IR missile paired with a helmet-mounted sight. Jakarta wants their Rafale pilots to know exactly what it feels like to go head-to-head with a Fulcrum in a within-visual range engagement, and how to counter those brutal off-board sight shots. Logically, that sounds totally reasonable, right? Using actual Eastern military hardware to train pilots flying advanced European and American jets. The US Air Force and Navy do the exact same thing out in Nevada and at the Top Gun program. But if you look at it from another angle, through the ruthless lens of international defense politics, there might be a high-stakes geopolitical chess move happening right in front of our eyes. Is Indonesia intentionally playing this narrative up to the world? Is framing the MiG-29 purely as a training target just a highly clever smokescreen? Let's look at the history. A few years ago, Indonesia struck a massive $1.1 billion deal to buy a fleet of advanced Russian Su-35 Flanker E fighter jets. That deal was finalized, but then Jakarta had to abruptly back out. Why? Because Washington, specifically the threat of CAATSA, the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. The US uses CAATSA as an economic sledgehammer to punish any nation that makes significant arms purchases from the Russian defense sector. So Jakarta is sitting there with a problem. They want to maintain their strictly constitutionally mandated non-aligned geopolitical stance. They explicitly want Eastern tech in their inventory so they're not 100% reliant on the West, but they clearly cannot buy from Moscow without tanking their economy with US sanctions. Enter Belarus. By purchasing MiG-29s from Minsk instead of Moscow and legally classifying them on paper as training equipment rather than frontline combat fighters, Jakarta might just have found the perfect loophole. This allows them to procure highly capable Eastern fighter jets, it keeps their military supply chains diversified, and, most importantly, it gives Washington enough plausible deniability to look the other way, preventing those crippling CAATSA sanctions from ever being dropped. It's a brilliant, calculated maneuver. Indonesia is getting the hardware they want, playing the East against the West, and doing it all under the guise of an aggressor training program. What do you think about Indonesia's move?
When you step back and look at the big picture, the dynamics in the Indo-Pacific are shifting at lightning speed. On one hand, you have traditionally isolated nations like New Zealand scrambling to arm their patrol planes with long-range anti-ship missiles just to hold the line against China's naval expansion. And on the other hand, you have a non-aligned powerhouse like Indonesia playing four-dimensional chess. Jakarta is carefully balancing Eastern and Western hardware, utilizing brilliant loopholes to build a formidable air force without triggering a diplomatic crisis. The rules of the game are changing, and no one wants to be caught unarmed when the music stops. But this brings up the ultimate question. Will the US eventually drop the hammer and hit Indonesia with sanctions down the line? Or will Washington just let it slide because they figure it simply isn't a real threat? After all, the MiG-29 is an aging Cold War relic that is arguably no longer relevant in a modern fifth-generation battle space.